Hi, I'm Katie Miranda, and today I am interviewing Dr. Hanan Ashrawi. She is a Palestinian legislator, activist, and scholar, and has been elected numerous times to the Palestinian Legislative Council. Dr. Ashrawi, can you tell us what is currently going on in terms of Palestinian political unity, about unity between the West Bank and Gaza, and Hamas and Fatah and other Palestinian factions?
Well, we are undergoing a very difficult period and a period of division and rift and political rivalry that has resulted in a breach between Gaza and the West Bank, also between political parties like Fatah and Hamas, as you said, and also among the people, which is extremely disheartening and dangerous. And of course, Israel has stepped in order not just to enhance and consolidate this rift, but also to exploit it. And therefore it has placed a siege on Gaza and isolated it from the rest of the world, let alone from the West Bank. And I personally believe that the only way forward, the only way to empower the Palestinian political system as a whole is through reconciliation, is through creating a genuinely inclusive democratic system that is tolerant, that accepts dissent and peaceful dissent, and that can formulate a political strategy to represent all Palestinians under occupation within 48 Palestine or Israel, and in exile and refugee places, refugee camps. So in a sense, a major source of weakness, internal weakness, has been this rift. And unfortunately, as a result of several years of division and separate governance, you end up with people with privilege and positions and so on, and it's very hard to let go of these acquired benefits. And at the same time, there are external forces and countries that are involved and that are also exploiting this rift.
Like the U.S.?
Israel, the U.S., certainly, because the U.S. Has followed Israel's lead in everything, particularly in, for example, branding Hamas as a terrorist organization, and therefore they put pressure and blackmail the Palestinian Authority and the PLO that if you reconcile with Hamas, you would be reconciling with a terrorist organization, and you cannot even negotiate with them. Although now they changed their mind because they want to they want to provide Israel with security. And Israel feels that it has to control and neutralize Hamas, and therefore it is willing to negotiate with Hamas, or it is willing to accept some reconciliation if it will provide Israel with security. This is another issue. But the main countries involved, of course, are regional countries. You have Qatar, you have Turkey involved in Gaza and with Hamas. You have others. You have the Americans putting pressure on the West Bank. Now, we have no contacts with the Americans whatsoever since the Trump administration gave away Jerusalem at will. And also there are Egyptians who are trying to bring about reconciliation, as they have been mandated to do so by the Arab countries as well. And right now there are talks between Hamas and Egypt and Fatah and Egypt.
What do you think Americans should be doing right now in terms of pressuring our government about Palestine?
The American people?
Yeah. Regular people like me.
You have a hard time, because I know that the Trump administration is in many ways wreaking havoc in the States. We thought it's going to be bad for the U.S., but it looks like he's bent on destroying the whole world. Acting unilaterally, isolationism, stepping out of multilateral international agreements like the Paris Agreement on climate change, stepping out of any kind of alliance, whether it's the EU and trying to disband it, or whether it's NAFTA, or and the whole mentality of exclusion, exclusivity, the racism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, misogyny, all these attitudes certainly have had a very, very negative effect and are detrimental to Palestine, precisely because there is a total disdain for international law, for issues like human rights and equality and so on. And these are the basis of any of our resolution. These are the issues not only that we aspire to, but we think should be the basis of any agreement. So I think the most important thing for the American public is to be able to stand up and speak truth to justice, so to speak, to be able to create networks and alliances and solidarity with the Palestinian people to challenge what now Trump is doing unilaterally. He has totally destroyed the chances of peace by dismantling all the components, all the building blocks, all the necessary the contents for peace, including he refused the two-state solution, which is to us a major and painful compromise to accept Israel on 78% of historical Palestine. He refuses to talk about the Palestinian state. He has single-handedly violated international law and numerous UN resolutions by recognizing Jerusalem, which is occupied territory, which is Palestinian. It's a Palestinian city. And he recognized it as Israel's capital, and he moved the American embassy there. He also now is targeting the refugees. He's attempting to dismantle UNRWA, which is the one organization set up by the international community to look after the Palestinian refugees, and not just to provide them with services like health and welfare and education and shelter and food, but also to defend their rights, because we did not choose to have Israel created on our land. It's the international community that created Israel on our land. And the dispossession of the Palestinians, the uprooting of whole areas and the destruction of hundreds of villages, the total razing of hundreds of villages, and the expulsion of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in 48 is the responsibility of Israel and, of course, of the international community that never respected its own resolutions or its own laws. So now you have Trump saying he's withholding funds for UNRWA. He wants to dismantle UNRWA. He wants single-handedly to redefine the definition, the status of a refugee in order to limit the number of Palestinian refugees. These are things enshrined in the law, international law, international humanitarian law. And Trump is single-handedly violating this and deciding to reinvent the law as he sees fit to suit Israeli priorities and actions. So we said the U.S. has moved from trying to be, it was never an even-handed peace broker, but into becoming complicit with the occupation, and they became, so to speak, partners in crime. This is extremely serious because the American people are always motivated by a sense of fair play. They don't know what's happening. They don't know that what Trump is doing is not only illegal, but it is also extremely cruel and inhuman. And he's punishing the victim while rewarding impunity and injustice and aggression and occupation. So he's tackling the issue by putting pressure and blackmail on the Palestinians, on the weaker party, on the vulnerable party under occupation. And he is emboldening and enabling Israel, that is the military occupation, and is holding a whole nation in captivity. So now it's Jerusalem, it's the refugees, it's the borders, it's Palestinian sovereignty, it's the settlements. They decided settlements are not illegal. Settlements are a war crime by international law, the Rome Statute. And yet David Friedman, the American ambassador to Israel, or we think of him as the Israeli right-wing spokesperson, decided that the Americans should drop the term occupation from their lexicon and that the settlements are not illegal. And of course resorting to all sorts of ideological arguments and biblical arguments rather than arguments of humanity and justice and international law. So the American public, once the people know what's happening, knowledge is a responsibility. They will act, and they understand that you cannot be a passive observer of something that is being done in your own name, particularly when you look at the Congress and how Congress is sort of echoing and adopting the positions of the pro-Israeli lobby, whether it's AIPAC or others, and turning it into American policy. when you see how the extreme right-wing evangelical movement, represented by Pence, decides that the Old Testament is the geopolitical tract on the basis of which you create 21st century realities, when you see the neocons deciding that Israel is the basic core of existence in the Middle East, and therefore everything you do has to... You need a counterforce, you need the voice of the people, you need honesty, you need integrity, you need courage, you need to stand up and not to accept to conflate criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. It has nothing to do with anti-Semitism or with the Jewish people or with any kind of religious affiliation. Palestine has always been and should always be pluralistic, tolerant, and inclusive, and should not be built on the basis of religious or ethnic exclusivity. So this is the kind of language, these are the issues that need to be raised, and we need people of courage and principle to stand up and to speak out and to make the facts known, the truth. There is so much disinformation and distortion and alternative facts, if you will.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible how you have these ready-made formulae of stereotypical misrepresentation and so on, and a wholesale adoption of a false narrative, really, that attempts to negate the Palestinians entirely, dehumanize them, not just victimize them, but hold them responsible for their own victimization, and exonerate Israel as the so-called the only democracy in the Middle East. Anybody who knows the facts knows that's not true. Anybody who knows the facts knows that any exclusivist and exclusionary system that attributes privilege and qualities to one group over the others by reason of religion or ethnicity, this is not acceptable. This is not the 21st century. This is not a democracy. Any country that enslaves a whole nation and systematically steals its land, not only that, but it confiscates its history, its culture, its narrative, even its cuisine, its food, like falafel and hummus and tabbouleh, and these things are own food. So they're stealing our culture. This is a country that thinks that theft is acceptable, whether it's land and resources, or whether it's a narrative, or whether it's a culture, and misrepresents its own victim. So we need the truth. And we need people who know the truth. We need people to know the truth, and with knowledge is responsibility, and with responsibility is action. And there are networks, and there are solidarity movements, and you know that there are people who have the courage and who dare to stand up and to speak out. And these are becoming more and more vocal and less intimidated, because they have to first stand up to these forces that really try not just to distort the narrative, but to punish people who want to tell the truth, and to label them in many different ways, even to the point where they're criminalizing BDS. I mean, they're attempting to violate people's right of free speech. I mean,
Yeah.
You know, they're violating their own people's rights and constitutional rights in order to enhance and safeguard Israel's impunity and Israel's aggression. So that's what we need. And I think to networks, it's a tall order, I know. But networking, reaching out, also reaching out to the Palestinians and addressing the integrity of the Palestinian cause as a cause of freedom, of justice, of human rights. This is who we are. This is what we are. And we do have natural allies and counterparts in the States and all over the world. Governments certainly have not just fallen short, but in many ways have entered into a partnership with the occupation, and are serving Israeli lack of accountability, and therefore enhancing Palestinian vulnerability, as I said.
What's been really frustrating for me since I got involved in Palestine activism back in 2005 is that more and more people since then are speaking up and getting a lot louder, but conversely, the situation in Palestine since then has gotten a lot worse. So that's really frustrating, to me, of course, but obviously to Palestinians as well.
Yeah.
So I'd like to ask you what resistance tactics in Palestine have produced positive results and moves towards Palestinian freedom, and tactics that Palestinians themselves should keep doing.
Yeah. We have adopted, officially and of course unofficially, because this is spontaneous primarily, a system of nonviolent resistance. And it's an active resistance, not a passive resistance, in the sense that, first of all, you refuse to succumb or acknowledge or accept any Israeli diktat or imposition. You have protest marches, you have sit-ins, you have all these things going on. But at the same time, part of nonviolent resistance is legal resistance. Resistance for accountability, where you take them to the International Criminal Court for not just the settlements, but for the massive killings that have taken place, and the murder of civilians, particularly in Gaza, and many other things, the treatment of prisoners, and so on. Then you have the resistance of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions, the BDS campaign, which Israel and the US are trying to criminalize all over the world, although these were very legitimate when it was South Africa that was engaged in BDS against apartheid. Now people are distorting, as I said, their own laws in order to pander to Israel. So that is another way. The whole system of networking, of public diplomacy, of standing up and speaking out, the whole issue of challenging the narrative. We are also trying to forge relationships, not just with countries and asking them to recognize Palestine and to take a different position and to challenge their official positions, but also primarily with people. We have groups that are our natural allies. We have minority groups. We have academics and intellectuals, especially in universities, that are daring to speak out, even though they know that some of them are being punished by withholding funds or by being maligned and labeled again. So all these are different aspects of providing Israel with accountability and Palestinians with protection. We're going to the UN. Many people say, why should you? Because the UN is useless in the sense that the US uses its veto to safeguard Israel and to maintain its immunity from any kind of accountability. But at the same time, we are placing the issues before the conscience of the international community of the world. We are challenging them to implement their own resolutions. There are many resolutions on Jerusalem, for example, and what the US did is illegal. What this administration did is illegal. No other administration dared to do that. Trump thinks that this is a good thing, that he's done it alone. There's a reason why nobody else did it,
Yeah.
And and the issue of UNRWA, exactly, it's not up to him. You cannot single-handedly reshape the world. So, in a sense, we're going to the UN and challenging, and we're going to the General Assembly as well, Uniting for Peace or United for Peace, in order to challenge all these moves. The US does not want us to join any international organization or accede to any international convention or treaty, and they threaten to punish us. And this is particularly the Congress that took resolutions that are absurd in their content, really absurd. Because in their overzealousness to serve Israel and serve its Israeli interests and to abide by the instructions of AIPAC, they took resolutions like they will defund any organization that accepts Palestine as a member. So in a sense, they gave us tremendous power, because when we join organizations and the US stops paying its dues and so on, the US will isolate itself, because we have the right. Now the international community decided that we are a state, albeit an observer state, but we are a state under occupation. So we are eligible to enter into contractual agreements, whether with international organizations or with international conventions and treaties, to safeguard our rights and also to shape the nature of Palestinian society in terms of women's rights, children's rights, rule of law, human rights, and so on, as well as our borders, our territorial waters, our skies, and so on. There are many, many issues that can be presented to different international organizations. Now, the U.S. Congress wanted to exclude us entirely from any kind of protection or consideration by the international community, so they took this decision because they control the funding, that they will stop paying their dues and stop funding, which means the U.S. after a while will not be able to vote, which means that they will no longer be active members of the international community. Mm-hmm. This means that their influence will be weakened. To me, it is unconscionable how Congress is willing to damage the interests of the U.S. for the sake of Israel. For the sake of Israeli violations, not just Israel. How they're willing to violate their own people's democratic rights, freedom of speech, freedom to choose in accordance with their conscience, the right to choose to be ethical consumers and ethical investors, for example, in BDS, by criminalizing this choice. They will not do it for anybody else. You're violating your own people's rights and doing it for the sake of a country that is living outside the law, not just above the law, and to maintain its ability to oppress another nation. This, to me, is beyond logic. It's beyond comprehension. And yet,
really
they're doing. Yeah, so the American people must know what's being done in the name of Israel to their own rights, to their own well-being. It's not just $38 billion have been pledged additionally to Israel, $38 billion. And they're cutting off $200 million of the Palestinians, or they're punishing the victim, of course, but they're rewarding Israel constantly. And this $38 billion, you should ask your own government, your own Congress, what can it do to the school system, to social security, to the health services in the U.S.? The income of the Israelis is very high, of individual Israelis. You're adding to that income. You're giving Israel weapons and know-how and technology to continue with this, while you are depriving your own people of services that they need.
Yeah, look, it's frankly, crazy. It's really crazy.
I have grandsons in the States, and they are in good public schools. And you have a brilliant, I don't say anything, Secretary of Education, Health and Education. And they've cut off funding for extracurricular activities and sports and arts and so on. So we, as the grandparents in Palestine, donated to our grandchildren's extracurricular activity in the States.
Oh my gosh.
Now, all that money that's going to Israeli militarization and oppression of the Palestinians, that should be spent, I think, on American kids.
Yeah, for sure.
We need to have sports and art and so on. And in deprived areas, we need to have full meals and so on. So again, you are willing to deprive your own people for the sake of Israel. There's another thing at the UN. I mean, Nikki Haley has appointed herself the defender of Israel, right or wrong, no matter what. And she gets her, talking points and marching orders from Danny Danon or from Sheldon Adelson or from David Friedman or whatever. And she says she gets them from Trump. But she speaks to the rest of the world. I said, who appointed her school mom? That she's taking down names of countries who vote against Israel or the U.S., and that they will use American funds to blackmail, really, withhold them from countries who support Palestine, who vote against Israel.
Every time she opens her mouth on this issue, I'm just like, what? What did she just say? Yeah. Again?
Isn't that amazing? She also says she prevented Guterres from appointing a Palestinian as his representative in Libya. Why? He's guilty because of his nationality. She said he's a Palestinian. If you appoint a Palestinian, that's anti-Israeli. So excuse me, the fact that we exist is anti-Israeli. So what are you proposing? So she has taken a position against Palestinians individually, singly, and collectively, and she has appointed herself with superlative self-righteousness as the defender of Israeli injustice, Israeli violations, and so on. And she's, in this high-handed, manner, she is threatening and blackmailing
Yeah.
countries and states that they respect international law and stand up to Israeli violations and now American violations systematically.
It's
So this is what,
embarrassing to have somebody like that in a position
isn't
of
it?
power and leading us.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think she's leading you. I think you have an administration that's leading you astray, but you have people who are misrepresenting you, whether in Israel or whether in the UN or whatever. They are really doing an injustice to the US. Of course, they are victimizing us, they're maligning us. But at the same time, they're not doing any justice to the US, to its standing, to its credibility, to its integrity, to its power, to its influence even. And the rest of the people cannot take this seriously. Now, there are many Americans who know, who read, who keep up with the situation with the age of social media and cyber knowledge and all that, and digital technology. People have access to the truth. But it's important that the truth comes out. It's important that you disentangle this web of deception or deceit that has really clouded decision making, that has prevented people from knowing the truth. Once you do that, the truth is our best ally. And I think that's when you will have people standing up and challenging these not just misleading, but these really cruel policies.
So what pressure tactics have proven to be effective coming from the international community on Israel or from the American people themselves? Like what's actually working that the international community is doing right now?
I think what works when it comes to Israel is something like, the voluntary BDS. Even though now they are Israel has legislated against them and has criminalized them and is preventing them from entering Israel even. And is punishing Israelis who are in favor of BDS. So that is important because that has shown that there is popular support and that the truth is coming out, even though people get punished for it. But it is very important. Then there are people who speak out, universities, campuses, and so on, public speaking. There are people who mobilize. There are linkages between the women's movement, the LGBT movement, indigenous Americans, Standing Rock. There are all sorts of common issues and principles and values on the basis of which we can act. And the more we connect, the more we link up, the more Israel is afraid. That's why it is using millions, hundreds of millions of dollars from Sheldon Adelson and others in order to taint, in order to invade social media, so to speak, in order to take over the discourse, the narrative in the social media, and so on. And is legislating really racist and oppressive laws against its own people who dare stand up to it. So this has worked. The networking, the use of nonviolent means, and challenging Congress, and challenging the administration, and also working together on issues that are joint and shared issues. This works because this is a spontaneous, honest expression, not just of solidarity, but of empathy and identification, because the cause is ours. It's not just an American cause, it's not just a Palestinian cause, it's not just a women's issue, it's not just a youth or black issue, it's everybody's issue. It's not the immigrants, it's not just Islamophobia, it's everything. So I don't know how you can best create these linkages because they are more often spontaneous, but they have to be organized, in a way that will make it work. So.
You mentioned earlier about the International Criminal Court. Could you tell us, if there was a ruling against Israel in the International Criminal Court, how would that actually be implemented?
Well, it is against individuals. The International Criminal Court will try individuals, not a state.
Okay.
Now, Israel says it is not a member of the ICC because it has not ratified the Rome Statute. And the same thing, the US is not a member of the ICC, even though now it is blackmailing and pressuring countries not to pay their dues and not to support and to put pressure on the ICC, the prosecutor, Bensouda, in order not to proceed or at least to drag her feet when it comes to Palestine. But I think the ICC is very important. And this is a real test for the International Criminal Court because it is known to try people in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. It will try black dictators and so on and culprits. And it will try leaders who were judged by the international community in with East Europe, for example, but it will not touch, white Europeans. It will not touch Israel. It will not touch America and so on. But now I think this is the test. Is the International Criminal Court going to respect its own mandate? It started a preliminary investigation on two issues. The settlements issue, which is a war crime according to their own statutes, and of course the killings and the attacks and the assaults on Gaza since 2014. We didn't go back earlier. Now there's the issue of the Palestinian prisoners and their ill treatment and so on. We cannot bring all these cases all at once, so we're starting with the settlement issue because it's an ongoing crime. And now we have to go beyond the preliminary investigation and to start taking measures and steps to try people. This means that they have to identify not just who was responsible for the crime itself, but for giving the orders.
I see.
Which means now the U.S. is trying its utmost to prevent this from happening, because this means that there will be individuals from Prime Minister to Minister of Defense to whatever you want, who will be held accountable, who will be seen to have given the orders, and not just when it came to the bombing and shelling of residential buildings and killing whole families in Gaza and so on, but also orders and support and financial assistance to the settlements and the settlers. It means every settler will be liable.
I see.
It means settler leaderships will be viable.
So what would happen to them? Like, would they, like, if they were convicted, then, like, what's the punishment?
They have to be tried in court.
Okay.
In the International Criminal Court. They're not going to try every settler, but there are two aspects. There's one where countries will stop dealing with settlements, and they will stop dealing with settlement products, and they will stop carrying out any kind of cooperation with settlements, because it means they are party to a crime. And therefore they know that they are liable to be prosecuted. And so countries have to tell their own firms, their own companies, while they are being criminalized for BDS, they're not being criminalized for the real criminal action of being partners in an illegal act of stealing other people's lands and resources. So now this has to be made clear to everybody. So this is a secondary aspect, that all firms, all companies, all tradespeople and so on who deal with the settlements, settlement products and so on, and partner with settlements, including banks, including businesses, will be liable to prosecution, so they will have to stop.
I see.
Now,
okay.
The other aspect is trying, of course, individuals, and particularly they would choose leaders who gave that order, who is responsible for that order. At one point in I think the attack on Gaza, there were 3 people who were named, whether it is, I think it was Tsipilivni and it wasn't Barak, I think it was Netanyahu and the Minister of Defense, I forgot who it was. But anyway, you have officials who take decisions. Those, you could have the Prime Minister, you can have the Minister of Finance. And all the ministries that send funding to the settlements. Now you have, for example, the Higher Council of Education that claims to be, neutral and objective. They are recognizing universities and so on in settlements. They recognize the Ariel University, and now they are also giving it additional support, and they are building training hospitals and so on, and medical. So they are liable again. And that's why the US and Israel have become hysterical when it comes to the ICC, and they're trying everything possible to put spokes in the wheel to make them either not move at all or to move so slowly that they will lose track, there will be no effect, because this will disrupt the whole thing. This is the one way to do it. Now, we know they work very slowly, but at least when people know that the process has begun, they will begin to watch out. And decisions will be taken in that way. But I think Israel has become so used to the U.S. administrations pulling their chestnuts out of the fire for them and providing them with cover and using, coercion and pressure and threats on their behalf, that they feel that their impunity also encompasses the International Criminal Court. Now, the U.S. has to know that it has taken illegal decisions as well, and we need an advisory decision, maybe from the International Court of Justice, as to the legality of their position on Jerusalem, or even their mandate on the issue of UNRWA, because it's not up to them to decide on international organizations that were set up in accordance with the will of the international community and in accordance with the law and with the whole legal and political system that was created after the Second World War, precisely in order to protect the vulnerable and to create legal and equitable relations among states and peoples. And this is what the U.S. is dismantling systematically and violating systematically in its over-enthusiastic approach to protecting Israel from the consequences of its own actions. So the American people can speak out and can, in many ways, seek justice and help us in this issue.
We're sure trying.
I know there are areas.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ashrawi. We are about out of time. This has been very interesting and enlightening, especially the part about the ICC. That's something that's not talked about very much in the United States, at least amongst activist communities. So I'm sure people will really appreciate hearing about that.
Thank you. We have to have recourse to the international legal system, whether it's the ICC or the ICJ or the different bodies at the UN. But that doesn't mean that we do not need the support of the international community, of world public opinion, of people of conscience like yourself and others, and people who should come to Palestine and should see what's happening. Because the more people who come and witness, the more they speak out, the more they are convinced, the more they can make a difference.
Yeah, that's really true, because it's one thing to read about it on the news, but it's another thing to actually see it. It really changes you. So I always encourage everybody who watches my interviews to go and visit Palestine.
Thank you. And we'll be glad to see them, and we'll be glad to show them around.
Thank you.
It's horrendous, but this is one way in which we can reach out effectively to the Palestinian people and say, you are not alone, and those things that are being done to you are not being done in my name, and we will not allow them to be done in my name.
That's so important. Thank you, Dr. Ashrawi.
Thank you, Katie.